All right, hello and welcome. It is Wednesday, October 11th. We have reached the start of our third week here. And now that you have finished the assignments for week 2, you have finished out your first project, 2D platformer, and completed the entire process. And going forward into week 3 and 4, the assignments and the kind of process of working on your next composition project, your next game project will be quite similar in the steps that we go through, but it is a new game and a new type of music that is necessary, a new approach to the music, but the general steps that we will follow will be familiar from weeks 1 and 2. So now that you have completed everything for week 2, that means that you have created the music. Last Wednesday, we took the opportunity to listen to the submissions from the first round of 2D Platformer. And this Wednesday, of course, we'll have another round of listening. I have a couple of the finished video captures to take a listen to. I got 5 here. So by this point, you have created the music. We did a little bit of peer review. We had the opportunity to do revisions to the music, to make any changes and updates that were necessary. You did the sound design this week. That is one of the main new aspects of these video captures that we'll be looking at. You have put all of your music and sound effects into the game. You tested it out, made sure that everything was working. Often at that point, once you have the music and sound effects in the game, something becomes obvious that something isn't working correctly, the mix is off, something's not looping properly, a file is missing or not playing back, or some issue becomes apparent. And then you have to kind of take a couple of steps back to figure out and make any changes, either go back into Logic or just fix the files in some sort of way. Test everything out, make sure it's all working properly, and then you did a video capture. You used QuickTime and Loopback to be able to capture what was going on the screen, capture full quality audio and video, and that's what we'll be taking a look at today. So with these video captures, it kind of sums up the entire project. The final assignment for week 1 and 2 is your composition description that you also just finished, where you posted up the link to the YouTube video. You answered a couple of questions about how you approached that composition. So that's the flow that we will be taking going into our next game project. Our next game is called Angry Bots, and we'll certainly be talking about that later on, introduce the new game, the new style of music, the new overall approach to everything. So that gets us into week 3 and 4. So that process of composition, revision, sound design, testing everything out, getting it into the game, and then doing a video capture is the same process that we will go into for week 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the submissions that we have here for 2D Platformer. Like I said, we have 5 total submissions. So the main thing that we are looking at and listening for in these video captures, I find that a video capture is going to often last a bit longer and be more readily available for your portfolio than just the game itself. You have the game, you have the application, that is yours to distribute and have other people check out. You can host it up on a Dropbox link, or you can post it on your website somewhere or whatever, and folks can download it and play it. But having just the game presents some limitations overall, mostly technical limitations. The main one would be that they have to have a Mac in order to play the game. And you've certainly a portion of the population that you want to show this off to is out for that reason. There's also the issue that a lot of folks very smartly do not want to just take an application that's they find on a Dropbox link or a website and just download it and run it on their computer. Now, of course, this is a completely perfectly good application, has no issues with it, but people would be smart not to just download random stuff and play it on their from the internet. So having a video representation of what's going on is a great way of showing off your work. And then once they see the video, they see what it's all about. Then if they want to play the game, you have a link available and they can make their decision at that point. The video is also going to probably stick around longer than maybe the technology would, meaning that Apple is notorious for changing operating systems and software, and things that used to work on your computer may not work going forward in a day or a week or a month. It's probably fine, but a year or 5 or 10 years from now, a YouTube link will still probably be there, or your video capture will still probably be viewable. The game application, depending on software, may get a little outdated overall. So having a video representation of that, like another example is I have older Pro Tools sessions that were done 5 or 10 years ago that would be much, well, I guess 5 years ago, maybe not so much, but 10 or 12 years ago might be a little bit more difficult to reconstruct in the actual session, but I have videos and I have audio bounces and all of that stuff sticks around for a lot longer. The other aspect is when they play the game itself, they might have some issue with the game or the gameplay. They just don't like the game. They don't know how to play the game. It's frustrating to them. I mean, 2D platform is pretty straightforward. Most folks, typically you would be sending this off to game developers and game future clients maybe. And those folks typically are techie folks that know how to play games or are into games, and so that's probably not all of that big of a hurdle. But there might be some aspect of the game that they don't like that looks negatively on or reflects negatively on your music. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, they love the game so much that they haven't really paid attention to your music. It takes them 2 or 3 times to actually stop just enjoying the game and focus directly on your music, which isn't necessarily a bad problem to have. But a video gives you a guided tour gives you the opportunity to give a guided tour through your work. The way you play the game, you can show off exactly what you want to demonstrate. You can show off all of the different aspects of the music, make sure all of the music and the sound effects and everything plays properly. So there's a lot of reasons that a video capture is valuable just as much as the game is. So having these video captures, you can easily add them to your demo reel, to your portfolio, your website, whatever it is, and show off the work that you have. What else? I'm just going to play this in the background, turn down the audio for the time being. Other things to consider for the video, one would be the volume mix. So we're listening, we heard everybody's music the last round, or everybody that submitted. We now have your sound design plus the files are in the game. So we have the full package. We have the graphics, the sound, the music, the interactivity of somebody playing the game, the full package. And often I find that the finished product is greater than its individual parts, or the sum is greater than its parts. Meaning that while last round we loaded up your WAV files into Logic, and we can pick it apart because it's just the music and we're looking at the waveforms, and I can zoom and play, and we can find all sorts of tiny details that could be improvements or changes to the files. But once you get it into the game and you have the graphics and the music and the sound effects and the interactivity all playing at the same time, then especially when it's somebody not just watching the video but actually playing the game, they often get lost in the game itself. The music and the sound effects, any sort of individual issues or problems kind of get glossed over because you have a lot of these different elements playing together. So anything that we pick apart in just the music or just the sound effects can often work itself out in the final mix. And of course, you want the individual parts to sound as best as possible because that'll make the whole even better. But that's always something that to notice. Another aspect is the mix. So you have the music and the sound effects in there at the same time. You have control over the mix in Logic, meaning that hopefully at some point you took the music and the sound effects and put them together in the same session and listened to them together. If not, then you certainly did that once you got it into the game. And so it's a question of the mix. Should the sound effects be louder than the music? Should the music be louder than the sound effects? And that is a creative choice that you have, since you do ultimately have control over the final mix. The main thing that we are trying to avoid is anything sticking out of the mix or completely getting masked, meaning that the sound effects are so loud that you barely hear the music. The gunshot is pretty bad at this. You have to watch out. The gunshot really doesn't need to be too loud because it's so constant. You're just going to, especially if the player just lays into the fire button over and over and over very, very quickly, it's going to stack up and it's going to often sound quite loud and mask a lot of other things. So pay attention. Sometimes I hear the dialogue lines since they were recorded versus maybe some of the other effects that come out of libraries. Dialogue might be lower than the music and the rest of the sound effects, kind of buried in the mix. So you don't want the music to bury the sound effects. You don't want the sound effects to bury the music. In the game, in a traditional game, sound effects is louder than the music. Dialogue is king. Dialogue, especially like story dialogue, narrative, those aspects need to definitely be heard. So they're at the top of the mix. Then sound effects is typically the information of what's going on. So that needs to be very present and very audible. Music is often underscore and telling the player how to emotionally feel about it, giving a sense of pace and the energy overall, especially in this type of game. So so typically in a traditional setup or structure, the sound effects are louder than the music. However, you are a music student. You are focused on music composition. This is your project. Maybe you want the music to be louder than the sound effects, which is perfectly fine also. Just as long as sometimes what I'll hear is maybe gunshot kind of masks the music, but then they get a power up or one of the bombs and it's like really, really loud. And then one of the dialogue lines is really, really quiet. So you want to watch out for any really big mismatches or mismatches like that. So, that's typically what I am listening for, and just kind of an overview of what to pay attention to for this type of submission. The other thing is, and I've kind of noticed as this video has been going on in the background, a lot of folks when they do the video capture, they play it like they're trying to win the game, and they don't lose very often. In this one, it is right at the very end. You die, you run out of health, and there it is. Here it comes. Boom. And then the video's over. So that means that we heard one intro and then one ending at the end. We heard all the main loops, more than likely. But since you only show one beginning and one end, we're missing some of that variation. So when you're doing a demo, try to show off as much as you can. Like go run down at the bottom and run off the edge, or purposely get enough damage. Yes, you should play the game for a little while to make sure all the sound effects are to show them off and they're all playing. And but eventually you put work into the intros and endings also, and you're only showing off one version of it. And that's a very common, I mean, not just this video, but it's a very common something I notice. So you want to think about it as a demo, not as a just gameplay. I got a question in a message about the file length. The assignment does say 60 seconds. I have, and you can probably get away with that in a 2D platformer, no problem. But if you start adding the multiple endings, and especially when we get into the next game, Angry Bots, it's much longer. I found that 60 seconds to 90 seconds is probably good. Certainly no longer than 2 minutes. And I guess if you go past 90 up to 2 minutes, that might be all right. But certainly nothing like 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes long. You're really not going to have anybody's attention for all that long. Typically, it's good to have lots of different variety where people are going to be shuffling through them pretty quickly rather than showing one long aspect of a project. Okay. I think that's what I can come up with for an overview. Let me make sure that this is playing. This is broadcasting. Hold on. I don't think it will be right now. Let's try this. And turn it down. Let's see if this plays. That looks like it's broadcasting. Can you hear that in the chat? Yes. All right. Cool. So let me rewind this back all the way. And yeah, we'll take a listen.
Bring it to him. Keep it classy.
Cool. All right. So I think everything works well. I think this would probably be an example of the gunshot being too loud, or it may not be that it's too loud, it's just played so consistently it masks a lot of stuff. I think the music could definitely come up. Well, it would be more of a question of whether the sound effects comes down or the music comes up. One of those two would probably need to be balanced a bit more. Because even as it's a low volume, mostly what I'm hearing is the gunshot. I like all the dialogue. I like the voice. Those could also come up. Everything plays properly. I think the music fits very well for the game. I like the energy of it. Let's see. What else? Balanced music versus sound effects. Gunshot could definitely come down. Dialogue could definitely come up. Yeah, and show more variations. But I think everything worked very well. I think it fits, and mostly all of that is just tweaks to whatever's there. All right, let's do the next one here.
Don't get twitchy now. Are you even trying? Hey, don't get twitchy now. Are you even trying?
Cool. Intros and endings start over well.
Ow. Ow. Hey. Ow. Ouch. This should be fun.
Nice jump.
Ow.
I like that alley-oop.
Ow. This should be fun.
Oh, you captured there's a bug, a visual bug that I've never been able to figure out because I've never been able to determine why it happened or when it happens exactly. But here, I think it happens on the death. Look in the back. There's a bus. It like disappears, and all you see are the tires that go by. And I've noticed that every once in a while. Let me go back to that and. All right, so I would say that similarly, the gunshot sounds great, but it's very punchy, and so it does mask quite a bit. That could come down. I think the attack would still allow it to punch through. Dialogue could definitely come up to match, so it could be heard a bit more. Music, I think, is at a good level. I think like that bomb works as a sound effect at its level as a sound effect. I like that pickup sound, that little metallic clink. Yeah, I think the sound design works very well. Yeah, just a bit more balancing. Intros and endings work. Excellent. So far, so good. All right, we're going to go ahead and check out the next one here. All right, so the quality is very thin on everything. This sounds like it was captured through the internal microphone on the computer. Like if you don't, you aren't using loopback or some sort of audio loopback device, then it will just capture out of your speakers on your computer to the internal microphone. That's like the default setup, and it kind of creates this thin effect. So it's kind of difficult to judge the overall quality of everything. It sounds like everything is there and working. The music sounds quite low, and that could be just part of the capture. The sound effects sound good. I like the little boing there. No! Like the dialogue, that works. So it's mostly about the quality of the capture. So watch out for that. Now, something as I was setting up this video, something else I noticed is in the beginning, I just wanted to start out with the actual video capture, is you do go through and you give a good explanation of what's going on and how you have things set up.
For last week's assignment, as well as this week's assignment for sound design. For the
which is awesome. And I want to show this part off also because I always encourage doing a little behind the scenes. Now, I would say focusing on certain aspects or not. What you have here is more demonstrating the actual music portion, and I would maybe try a an aspect of it where you're more explaining how you did something, or you're not just playing the different music cues, but maybe focusing on just one main loop or just the main loops and saying, this is why I chose this flanged bass and this steely beats in Liverpool, and these are my different layers, and this is how I approached this composition. Instead of demo, because you demo the music over here in the actual video capture. So I always encourage, this is a great approach for a demo video, beyond just showing off the game. Like, that's well and good, but it doesn't really show your process, which is often even more valuable. So as a kind of above and beyond, which is exactly what this is, which is great, not only showing what you did, but how you did it. So, and it should be kind of short and sweet also, just like the video capture is. So this goes, because you show off each of the music cues and you show off each of the sound effects. Let's see, it's about 3 minutes or so before it switches over to the video capture. I would say pick like one aspect of the music and one aspect of just a sound effect, and say, this is how I built this sound effect, and this is how I built this intro or main loop or ending. 30 seconds to a minute at the most, and then show off the final result. Basically say, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I did it, and this is the final result. If you can do that in 2 minutes, that is a great video. But then, like I said, keep them short and sweet, and then do lots of little ones, and you'll have some great material to show off. So I definitely want to give a thumbs up to the video capture, and you should check it out, the full version of it on FSO. Okay, so I would say I can't really judge the music because it is a lower overall. I can hear the sound effects and say that the overall intention of them and the vibe of them work well. So look into definitely using loopback, which is detailed in the PDF, the workflow PDF. If you have any issues going forward forward with that, then let me know and we can set up a time to discuss. So good. All right, moving on to the next one. Try this one.
Ow, ow.
All right, so I'm just gonna, it's, again, about a minute or so, 90 seconds should be the limit here, like a 4-minute long demo. Oh, especially when it's like desktop and whatnot. So any of this part over here with the desktop, you should definitely cut off and just cut down the demo overall. I was wondering in the first half what happened to the gunshot, but that is a bug that we've noticed, that the second time the game starts, like play through one time, you lose all the health, you respawn and start over again. then sometimes the gunshot is missing, but it does come back later on over here. I would also say that this is similar in the mix of the music and sound effects, especially the gunshot, really overrides the music. There's some great brass and some great rhythm and movement in there that does seem to kind of get lost in the overall mix. I'm hearing some of the original sound effects also, like player... What is it called? Ouch. It's the ouch taunt, the ouch wave files. The rest of them seem to be there, so double check the mix of your music versus your sound effects. Music could definitely come up to compete. And yeah, just shorten up the overall demo. I think most of the pieces are what is there and is working well. All right, and do one more here.
In your extraterrestrial dreams, you guys have no chance. Beat it, Blob. Ow!
Nice save.
Ow! In your extraterrestrial dreams. Ow! Ow!
Dialogue is great.
Ow!
Are you ready for this?
In your extraterrestrial dreams.
All right. So, great stuff overall. First, the production quality is great. The mix between the music and sound effects works well. I like the sound of the gunshot. I think it works. It doesn't you can definitely hear it being fired. I think that's the higher frequencies. But it doesn't really get in the way of all the other sound effects. There might be, I mean, it does sound a little sci-fi-y compared to if it's like a rocket launcher, but I think that works just fine. What other aspects? Okay. Great instrumentation, great production, good mix. The sound design, like I said, I like the dialogue. The things that I would watch out for would be the voices in the music, or things that could be interpreted as dialogue or sound effects in the music. Typically, unless it's very much discussed, the composer doesn't want the sound designers making any music, and the sound designers don't want the composers making any sound effects. Or let's put it this way, the sound designers don't want any sound effects in the actual bounced music, because when it gets to mix later on, it becomes much more difficult. Like who actually makes the music or sound effects, that a little bit different. But watch out for things in the music that could be interpreted as sound effects or dialogue. Now, since it's just you and you have complete control over it, then you know exactly what you want to do, and that's perfectly fine. But it is definitely something I want to point out, where things like the call out in the front there, line of dialogue there, the kind of vocal synth in this one could be interpreted for a alien voice, which could be maybe kind of the intention. And then there was the dub horn also, that which could also be interpreted as the sound effects. So not to say that it shouldn't and doesn't need to be in this mix, but it's always something to consider overall when you are just the composer working with the rest of the audio team. You want to typically either discuss it or figure out where those boundaries are. This, I would say, is a good example of where the music dominates the mix and works as like the showcase of the music. Let me go back to the endings there. I think the endings with the pitch ramp works well. Cool. Everything kind of falls down. Definitely makes sense with you losing all the health. Cool. Nice work. Yeah, so you do die once there in the middle, so you show off a couple of the intros and endings. Music, sound effects, mix, capture. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to mention. I think it works out well for the purpose. All right. Well, that lets us take a listen to all of the submissions. Again, I always encourage that everybody submit their compositions and their videos and anything so we can discuss them. Excuse me. If you have any questions, please let me know. And going forward next week, we will be listening to your Angry Bots submissions. So we'll be back on the composition itself. So definitely take that opportunity to submit, and we can talk about it and discuss whatever is necessary. So now, if you have any questions, please let me know. But we're going to turn it over to the archive that will discuss the new Week 3 assignments and focus on your new game composition, Angry Bots. So let me know if you have any questions about the assignments or anything coming up in Week 3. And other than that, thanks. So now that you have done the first round with our first project, 2D platformer, we will now go into the second 2 weeks and get into our second project. If I go here, there we go. So this is FSO, and here in Week 3, you have the new Angry Bots composition with a series of videos that reference the composition in the preparation, recording, and composition of this type of project. A couple of different approaches to help you get started. Then we have a chiptune composition, where, since we're going to talk a bit about, we did talk about the history of music and technology and genres of music for games. I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of that with a particular composition here, where the main restriction is using the original limitations of the original Nintendo system. So we discussed that the NES had four basic waveform channels, and you're going to compose a composition using those same restrictions. So I'll discuss that here in a bit. And then we have the opportunity to submit next week for peer review. Had a few more people or different people submit this round, which is always excellent. We always want to encourage everybody, or as many people as possible, to participate so we can get a variety of different projects there. And then the rest of we got the class and suggested reading material. So that's what we have in store. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. And the Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in, and we have to be able to switch musically seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key, even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then WASD work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we have to, we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. Let me go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long. And those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The Ambient. So if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on, so we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot, so it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient cue is playing until somebody takes damage, and at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health, either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick, and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So, same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot. As this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the Mech Bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include or probably should include a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the base tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue. Have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am. Just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think Here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. And it's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together. And I failed to mention, actually, let me go back to FSO here. I didn't even talk about the fact that none of this is actually due this Sunday. We have spring break next weekend. So I'm sure we're all going to the beach and partying all the time. And no, I'm sure you're at home practicing your scales and your chord progressions and being a good student. Whatever you end up doing on spring break, or maybe just sleeping, whatever. Then you don't actually have your homework due this Sunday. It is due the 23rd, the Sunday after spring break. So also no class next week. We will meet back up in week 4, but that did just the schedule did remind me that we don't have anything due directly this week. So maybe you work on this for a little while, and you also work on our other composition for this week, your chiptune composition. So as I mentioned, we talked a bit about the history of game consoles and different music genres, the technology and the music and the capabilities of games over the different decades. And you're already getting a feel for what it's like to compose for modern games and modern styles. But to give you a sense of where we are at now, we're going to go all the way back to where this began, so you can see what some of the ideas and challenges that they were dealing with then even are still some of the same challenges we deal with today. But you are going to compose in the style of what is commonly known as 8-bit chiptune music, or also sometimes known as Nintendo music, because it sounds very much in the style and limitations of the original Nintendo system. So in our discussion last week, we said that most of the melody and harmony and rhythm of these original Nintendo soundtracks were created with 4 basic waveforms. There was a 5th sample channel that was used, but most of that was also can be used for sound effects. So a lot of the melody and harmony and rhythm was done with these 4 basic channels, and those are 2 pulse wave channels or square waves, 1 triangle channel, which was mostly for bass, and 1 noise channel, that white noise channel, that was for percussion. So provided with this assignment, you get the PDF that kind of outlines everything. But provided with this assignment, you get a logic session that has everything that you need to work on this composition. And so mainly we're concerned with the restrictions, like composing within the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So you only have 4 simultaneous sounds. These 4 channels each have an EXS24 loaded up on them, and in that EXS24 there are sound banks that have sounds and waveforms pulled from the original Nintendo system and the Famicom system, which was the earlier version of the Nintendo in Japan. So you listen through these and you'll probably hear some very, very familiar types of sounds that you can use for your composition. So those sound banks are loaded up across tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you are limited to only 4 tracks at any one time. Now, that means you can have more than 4 tracks, but only 4 ever play at once. So we've easily had people with compositions that are 10s and 20 tracks deep that are just constantly switching between different layers. So, and the original Nintendo could do this. It only could play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between the timbre or the tone of those sounds very, very quickly. So we have those loaded up. So how you use those 4 channels is up to you. Another requirement of this project is you have to have drums, you have to have a melody, and you have to change the sound or the tone of that lead melody at some point in the composition. So you need to have drums, you need to have melody. That means you have 2 channels left. That means you can have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, bass, melody, counter melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody. There's all sorts of fun combinations. So what instruments you choose, up to you, with the limitation or with the restriction. You have to have drums, you have to have melody. Then what else? What other? You can change your lead sound. You can have multiple sounds, but only 4 at any one time. When we started this composition, when we started this project, I was kind of worried about the quality of the compositions because the sounds are so bad, quote unquote bad, that that it would end up sounding like I don't know, like Fisher Price music or something. Really, something really cheesy overall. And I found that compositionally, these are some of the best projects because this, again, since the sounds are so bad, you are kind of focused on using harmony and melody to create more interesting compositions. I think some of the maybe drawbacks of having almost endless choices in your DAW is a lot of people, they spend a lot of time when they're starting to write music just switching between sounds, switching between presets, trying to find a cool and interesting sound. And once they find that sound, then they write a melody around whatever that sound is, versus the other way around, of writing a melody first, compositionally, and then determining what sound you actually want it to sound like. Well, in this composition, the sounds are so bad that's not really much of the concern. So you're focused so much more on harmony and melody, you end up getting some pretty strong results. So I have a couple of examples here that I want to play, and somewhere. I think this is going to work. I may not have complete volume control, but here, these are all student submissions from this composition. Now, these are some of the best, but this just shows you where this can go overall. Oh, hold on, I don't think I have. I want more volume control. Hold on. Let's try this. Down a little bit. Now. Especially a part like this. So, lots of movement.